Today on A Word on Westerns, Janet Arness.
Jim always had such respect for Wayne, and when Wayne opened the show for Gunsmoke, Jim had no idea that John Wayne was going to do that. He was at home in his living room with his family, going to watch the opening of Gunsmoke, the first episode, and here comes John Wayne, and Jim was really blown away. That was extraordinary for Wayne to do that.
Welcome to A Word on Westerns, where we talk to the greatest Western creators of yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Hi, I'm R.J. Word.
And I'm Rob Word, the proud father of R.J. Word, and the podcast is called A Word on Westerns. Cute, huh?
I guess.
Well, it's maybe words on Westerns because we're doing this together. And I think that part of the thrill for me is that Westerns that I grew up on, because I'm an older guy, they were on television all the time. During the 1950s and 60s, there were 40 new Westerns broadcast on television each week. And there were only 3 networks at the time.
And when I grew up in the late 90s and early thousands, network television was garbage.
Oh, wait a minute. So what's happened is the proliferation of all of these digital channels are out there, and they're looking for product, of course, because there's so many of them, and they find a brand that works for them, like INSP or the Westerns Channel. TCM runs a lot of classic Western movies. It's a wonderful time to be absorbing these film classics.
And it's a better time than ever to have taste because you actually get to choose what you want to watch.
Well, that is true. And the off-network Westerns and the syndicated Westerns, and these are terms that don't really mean anything to a much younger generation, but are available to stream and also to watch on digital channels. Gunsmoke ran for 20 years, from 1955 until 1975. It began on CBS Radio, and this is kind of like radio now, isn't it?
Podcasts are the resurgence of people talking in your ear for a long time.
And there's even some new dramatic podcasts, and maybe a Western podcast would be great. Hey, that's what we're doing. We're going to be interviewing the people who made some of these great shows. Now, let me get back to Gunsmoke, because it was on for so long that it began as a half-hour TV series in black and white. In 1955, the radio show had already been running, and it was successful. It was an adult Western, and in 1955, that was the first year of adult Westerns premiering on network television. There were Cheyenne, Life and Legend of Wyatt Earp, and also Gunsmoke. Gunsmoke took the scripts from the radio shows, the half hours, and dramatized them. They didn't use the people who made the radio show, which was William Conrad, later to become canon on television. He was Matt Dillon. James Arness became an icon. He had been under contract to John Wayne. John Wayne talked him into doing the TV series. At that time, you didn't want to do TV because movies were where you wanted to be. But luckily for all of us and for James Arness, he ended up doing 20 years of Gunsmoke. It started as a half hour in black and white, and then after about 7 or 8 years, it became an hour-long show because television was demanding that at the time, hour-long dramas. It was still in black and white. And then the third phase of Gunsmoke were the color hours. The fourth phase was 5 Gunsmoke movies after the show had finished airing. And our guest today has a very good connection to James Arness.
Really? She knew him pretty well?
Did I say it was a she?
Oh, really? Our guest knew him pretty well?
Our guest knew him very well, and it is Janet Arness, who married James Arness the last year of Gunsmoke.
Incredible. And she has so many fantastic memories to share with us. This was a very fun interview.
It really is, and people want to know how they met, what Jim Arness was really like. Was he like Matt Dillon, or was he more like the character he played on TV's How the West Was Won? So we're going to find out a lot from Janet, and also we're going to be joined by Jim Arness's co-star in How the West Was Won, Bruce Boxleitner. We've got both of them on the show today.
You know what I want to know?
What?
How you do this without a script. I know you listeners can't see this right now, but he just made all of that off the top of his head, and it's incredible. I hope my memory's that good when I'm an old man like you.
You know, and Boxleitner always says, take Predigen, and I say, I don't need it.
You really don't. This is the best exercise any mind can endure.
Endure is right. Well, you're going to have fun listening to this. Janet is a doll and so charming. And here's the inside scoop on Gunsmoke's Matt Dillon, the real-life James Arness. Janet, a lot of people wonder about the relationship that Jim had with his brother, Peter. Were they close friends?
I'm glad you asked me that question because Jim and Pete were very close. But Peter had a certain type of lifestyle and Jim had a different type. Pete was into the country club. He had golfing and different parties. Jim was not a party man. He was into surfing and flying and traveling the country. We'd go to a lot of national parks. So when we got together, it would usually be at the holidays. You know, Christmas, we always got together, the whole family. When Jim had his ranch out in Simi Valley, Pete and his family and Jim's dad and we all got out there and had Thanksgiving, and it's a beautiful place in Simi Valley, and we had a lot of fun together. So, no, Jim and Pete had a good relationship. It's just in the circle of friends, they didn't have the same circle of friends. But as far as Pete and Jim, they were very close.
Did he ever talk about growing up together?
Oh, all the time. Yeah. Jim was, I think he's 2-3 years older than Pete. And of course, when you're growing up, your little brother, you know, wants to tag along when you want to go off with your friends, you know, and Jim would kind of shoo him away. But, every summer they rented an island in Minnesota at Ox Lake. And so Pete and Jim would go there for the summer with their parents, and they would boat and swim and, go through the forest and pick berries. One of the things Jim liked to do by himself, though, he would take the rowboat, go across the lake, and he'd find a big tall tree, and he'd climb up that tree, and he'd sit there for hours, and he would imagine what it was like maybe years ago or in the frontier, or he would just meditate up there and have a very special memory of that. He really did. He enjoyed that. But he and Pete, oh my gosh, as kids, they had a great time. They would ice skate and ski. They did a lot of skiing together. But as they got older, Jim came out to California first. And then a few years later, Pete came out. And Jim knew it was kind of a tough business, even though he had but he had a part in The Farmer's Daughter. After that, he didn't get any work for a while. And he told Pete, you know, you might want to go back. I don't know if it's going to work out here, but it worked out for both of them, which was pretty darn amazing.
Well, I know that his father and mother must have been so proud of both of them, looking through the scrapbooks that I guess his dad put together, with all of just about every time Jim was mentioned in anything is in that scrapbook.
Oh, I know. And it's amazing because I just came across the scrapbooks in a box, and he has newspaper articles, and he has photos and wonderful memories and family photos. I found a lot of family photos with Jim and his kids and Pete and his children, which, it it was really amazing. I thought, where has this been all these years? I'm still opening up boxes since I moved.
It seems like he was a collector of everything, not just getting the scrapbooks from his parents, but so many people would send Jim items about Gunsmoke. His character of Matt Dillon and his later roles certainly seemed to touch a chord in the American consciousness.
Well, it did. And you got to remember, Jim was on Gunsmoke for 20 years. So over the years, I have letters from ministers, from senators, from, you just name it, any police officers, people who really enjoyed the show. And Jim, he kept all those letters, which is amazing because you would think they would just read them and throw them out or answer them and they'd be gone. But I have quite a collection of memorabilia from people who have sent Jim items and letters, beautiful letters.
With so many of the Gunsmoke episodes and Red River and How the West was running on multiple channels, what do you think of the resurgence of the Westerns? I think Jim obviously has a lot to do with that.
I do. I think because of the stories on Gunsmoke, which Jim always credited the writers, they had such wonderful stories. And you can look at Gunsmoke, and you could have seen that episode 3 or 4 times, and yet you're not quite sure what's going to happen next. I mean, that happens to me sometimes. I'm going like, gosh, I've seen this so many times, and yet, well, what exactly is going to happen next, you know? But they did have wonderful writers, and if you don't have a good script, you're not going to have a good show. They had the best. They had the best writers.
When John Wayne passed away in 1979, what impact did that have on you and Jim?
Well, Jim always had such respect for Wayne. When Wayne opened the show for Gunsmoke, Jim had no idea that John Wayne was going to do that. He was at home in his living room with his family, going to watch the opening of Gunsmoke, the first episode, and here comes John Wayne, and Jim was really blown away. That was extraordinary for Wayne to do that. Of course, they were both very busy men, but they always had a good relationship. But Jim always had the best respect for Wayne, because if it hadn't been for Wayne, Jim was in his company before he even started with Gunsmoke. He did a number of movies with Wayne, and they always got along. And they have the same birthday, which is amazing. Yeah. And when Jim first did, I think it was Sea Chase, and it was Wayne's birthday, but Jim didn't say anything. And they're having this big party, but a friend of Jim's was there and knew it was also Jim's birthday. Well, when Wayne found out, he had Jim come in and, so they both celebrated their birthdays together. I mean, that just shows you what type of person Wayne was.
Jim picked up a trick from Duke in that he was giving away mugs every year of Gunsmoke, and Duke gave mugs away. In fact, Jim has several of those for each movie that he made.
Yeah, he does. He has one for Sea Chase, Hondo, and Big Jim McLean. Jim, every year you're trying to think of, well, what can I give the crew that would be meaningful? And Jim would look at different designs, and he actually picked what would be on the cup of each year. So for 20 years, and I don't know if anybody, most of the crew would have quite a few of them because the crew stuck together for many years. But I didn't even think I had all 20. And the other day I found a box that had the last 3 I was missing. So I have all 20. And I think Doc had all 20. But that would be just amazing because I thought, over the years, I'm sure one of them got lost or whatever. But they were beautiful. They were hand-painted by a French artist on China, and then Jim would sign the back of it.
The following portion of this interview was recorded at an earlier date and features actor Bruce Boxleitner.
I'm glad you are both here. The show, Gunsmoke, and Jim's entire career means so much to a lot of people. I'm just thrilled to have you here.
It's really nice to see everybody here.
Would love to have you share some of the stories about Jim. I know he was a surfer, a pilot, and a big sportsman, a sailor. How did you meet him?
Well, his makeup artist, Glenn Alden, his wife owned a dress shop on Tujunga Avenue, and I happened to work for her. And I worked for her maybe 6 or 7 years, and she would tell me about Jim and their adventures, and but I never met him. And one night she said, well, you know, Jim's coming over for dinner. Why don't you come over and meet him? And I thought, oh, you know, an actor, I don't know.
An actor.
Yeah, yeah. But my son was really into Gunsmoke. He loved Gunsmoke and was watching it every Monday night. So I thought, oh, okay, I'll meet Jim and I'll tell my son I met him. So went over to their house. Well, I got there before Jim did. And I'm sitting there nervously waiting, and I hear a knock on the door, and here comes this huge man through the door. I mean, he is a big guy, and he was very polite. We were introduced to each other. We sat down, and Jim was so friendly. He was just so down to earth, and my nervousness went away, and we just started talking, and he was a skier, and I was into skiing, so Jim had an old cabin up in Mammoth. That was one of the miners' cabin. He said, you know, sometime we've got to go skiing, and I said, oh, that's great, you know, and that's how we met. And after dinner, he walked me out to my car and said, well, I'd like to call you. And I said, okay. So he called me the next day, and I'm going like, oh, this is nice. And he was flying up to Mammoth Lakes. And he said, would you like to go? And I said, yeah, I'd love to go. My dad was a pilot. My brother's a pilot. So I had no qualms about being in a small plane.
And what plane did he have at that time?
He had a Bonanza, a Beechcraft Bonanza. We flew up there and just talked, you know, about life and everything going on. We went to a place called Red's Meadows. Have you been there?
No.
Well, he rented horses. And I hadn't been on a horse since I was like 5 years old. And he rented these horses, and first we stopped at a grocery store. We go into this grocery store, and Jim gets, Jim loved to shop. He loved food. We got cheese and crackers and bread and wine and all kinds of goodies, you know. And then standing in the market was this advertisement of Jim, lifetime, holding cigarettes. And I was like, oh, God. But we took this trail. Jim knew exactly where he was going. And we passed a waterfall, and my saddle got loose, so we stopped, and he cinched up the saddle for me. And we finally get to this remote place where people had camped. And we sat down on a couple of logs, and we had lunch, and we just talked about our families and what I did for a living, and I knew what he did. So, but afterwards, what really impressed me about Jim was he stood up when we were finished, and people who had camped there before had left trash on the ground. And Jim went, and he picked up all the trash and put it in his saddlebag. And he cleaned up the whole place. And I thought, that's a cool guy. So, because we went up there on a Thursday, and he said, well, what are you doing this weekend? I thought, gosh, I don't want to look too anxious, you know. Yeah. So I said, well, I can't make it this weekend, but, you know, next weekend. And he said, well, I'm flying up to Alaska, and I'm going to be gone for a few weeks. So I'll call you when I get back. And I think he went on that trip with John Mantley. Mm-hmm. That was one with John Mantley and a friend of his who was a doctor friend, and they had a sailboat together. So 3 weeks go by, and a month goes by, 2 months go by. I don't hear anything from Jim, but I knew he was back because I worked with the lady whose husband was his makeup artist. So she said to me, well, why don't you give Jim a call? And I said, I bet Jim has a lot of women calling him. I said, he's got my number. If he wanted to call, he would call. About 3 months later, he did call me. And we went out to dinner, and after that, it was
Perfect.
a relationship that lasted for the rest of his life.
That's great.
Yeah.
And I remember when you, the word was on the set of How the West Was Won that you were coming out, that Jim, I remember the first time you came out to that set.
Yeah.
I do. And we were all, who is she going to be and what is she going to be like? And,
Yeah, because Jim was so private,
he was such a private man.
Yeah.
And so this was a big deal that we were actually going to know a little bit more about his private life, you know?
Yeah.
And there you were.
Well, when we got married, they didn't even have a photo of me. They came to the dress shop looking for me. And I told them, I'm not here. I didn't want any pictures taken. I'm like Jim. I was very private.
Bruce, when you were making One Man's Justice,
Yeah.
which was the last Gunsmoke movie.
Yeah, I don't think they planned on it being that way. I think it's just, it happened that way. I didn't intentionally kill Gunsmoke. So I do want to say I was, according to John Mantley, I did one of the last episodes shot of the series. And I think Jim was only like doing like a day or something on it. It's because he was dating you at the time. That's why. Now I find out why that whole last season he was rarely there, And, but I did one. I was so, and he said it was the worst one in 15 seasons. You don't want to hear that from an executive producer.
No.
And there I am standing on his new show and How the West Was Won going, well, why did you hire me then? Because I was god-awful. I'm not even going to mention the episode. I will not even ever. I saw it on Inspire TV a couple of weeks ago.
Is that the sharecropper or something?
Yeah, the sharecroppers. Thank you, Rob. That was good. It was Jim who got me that role on the pilot and then the series.
He remembered the sharecropper.
Oh, God, I hope not. I hope not.
No,
I had just come out. I was playing to the 100th role. I come out from the theater and I thought I was, still doing theater acting. I since learned after that much more about.
With Jim and How the West Was Won, did you observe how he acted to bring everything down? I know you looked at him and saw how the set was because of him. Because it starts up at the top.
I think Janet can agree. He was a fun-loving guy. He loved to have a little prankishness, going on. Could always hear, I always knew it was a great day because I could hear him coming from his trailer and someone's either just told a very dirty joke or something, because he would have this high cackling laugh that it would make you laugh. Right. Just listen, right? Am I right?
Oh, yeah.
And, but yeah, it was, I'm a firm believer, and this is what I learned a lot from him. I've said in interviews that for me, he was sort of a mentor. He would have never, he was too shy of a guy to ever, but it was by example, is the way I put it. I watched how it was to be a television star on a day-to-day basis on a set where predominantly we were outdoors, so everyone was kind of on an equal footing. If it was hot, everybody was hot. If it was cold and wet, everybody was cold and wet. We shared that. That's what's fun about doing Westerns, is that there's very few divas on a Western set, or they're in their motorhome, And Jim wasn't. He would sit out, on days he was feeling like it. He was just a lot of fun. He joked around with us a lot. And there was always that sense of humor going on. By How the West Was Won, I call it was kind of Gunsmoke Part 2 before the TV movies happened, because it was generally the same crew. Yeah. And I think Jim, tell me if I'm wrong, was very comfortable having those people he'd been with for years, around him. And plus the character he played, Zeb McCann, was so different from Matt Dillon, in many, many ways. Matt Dillon had his charming side, but he was much more serious, all right, hold it. Whereas Jim, he got to physically be different. You know, he had that limp from the war, and he used it. And his costume was different. He had that big old buckskin outfit on, and he let his hair grow mountain man looking, and he had a mustache, and he got to be much more saltier and fun.
More of the real Jim.
More of the real Jim came out in that character, And but he led by example. I would not say that he taught me, but he would whisper something to me, you know. Seeing the dragon, we got to move this thing along. And he'd always come up to me under, and he'd talk like this. And I'm like, you know, I'm 6'2", and he was towered over me. I used to say that when we were in Kanab, Utah, it was that bright sun. I would go stand not too close to him to make it look weird, but I would stand and I'd stay out of the sun that way. He actually was so big, he provided the shade for me.
And he had the big hat.
And a big hat on, man. I was like, I'd just go, yeah, right there. Okay, that's good. But, you know.
Well, you and Jim had great chemistry. That was one reason that Jim wanted you for How the West Was Won. You guys really.
I was so happy because he saw my screen tests, and there's probably, I don't know how many other guys, and I know ABC was pushing for another guy.
Yeah.
They wanted to make he was a soap opera guy, and they wanted to make him a primetime star, and thank God Jim had the casting approval, because he stuck with it. I actually saw that after he had passed on YouTube. Somebody had sent it to me.
Really?
Where he did the interviews for Television Academy, I think it was. Mm-hmm. He talked about some sequences about, I remember was casting of Burt Reynolds in the series Gunsmoke, and then he did one on me, and he said, basically they were in a screening watching these screen tests, and he said, no, I kind of like this third guy or whatever it was. And they said, well, Jim, you know, we kind of like this, the number one guy there. And everybody really thinks we have a chance with him. No, I kind of like this third guy. And he stuck with me.
Yeah.
So much for Richard Hatch.
Oh, I wasn't even going to say the name. Oh, well. Yeah, okay, there it was.
Now,
there are no secrets here, I'm telling you.
No.
Let me ask you about Red River, the remake.
Yep.
How did he feel about stepping into John Wayne's
Do you remember him saying anything?
Well, you know, that was a big step, and he wasn't sure if he really wanted to do it, you know.
Yeah.
But Red River was one of Jim's favorites that John had done. Mm-hmm. And, you know, they worked together on Hondo. So he was a little reluctant, yeah.
I remember when that came out, when that happened, and the head of CBS television, I was doing The Scarecrow and Mrs. King at the time, I had just done it, finished it, and they were going to do this, and they were talking about all these other names, these other guys. Kirk Douglas. I would have been looking at Kirk Douglas's forehead. I mean, looking down on it, you know, standing next to him. And I kept saying, there's only one guy that do this. I just don't know that he would do it, because I actually heard him, you know, he held Duke Wayne in such reverence that, and I think it was pretty short notice, Janet, that he really, they asked him short notice, and he did it. I was cast first, and I only thought, my God, there's only one guy who's the equivalent of John Wayne, and especially on television.
Mm-hmm. And Jim knew it wouldn't be the same. I mean,
no, it's not going to be, and it wasn't the same. But the fun was in the making of it. I got to tell you, that was a ball. He loved it. And Ben Bates, who I'm sad to say just passed away a month or so ago, I had to do a fight with him, and Jim did all the close-ups. We had the final fight between Matthew and Dunson, and then I did the rest of it and all of it with Ben Bates. Mm-hmm. And I probably still have chiropractic problems because of it. But no, Jim, I was so glad he did that. And, you know, it did okay. They showed on the Westerns Channel once in a while. And then I didn't see him again or hear from him again until the Gunsmoke movie. Mm-hmm. I guess they wanted somebody else for that, too. They wanted some singer like Travis Tritt or somebody like that. And I had already done the Gambler movies with Kenny Rogers. Mm-hmm. So I did the opposite. I worked with a singer, you know, who was acting. But
well, all of the Gunsmoke movies are strong, I think.
Really strong.
The first one, the only thing that bothers me about that is he powdered his hair black, and it's like dust particles would be floating as he was delivering lines. And this is after he had done How the West Was Won, and he looked so wonderful in the silver hair. And then all of a sudden they powdered it.
They did that,
they only did it
know.
one time, I think. But,
Somebody's decision was to want Matt Dillon to look like he was back in the day. And those are sometimes really stupid decisions.
Yeah, right.
Well, I want to thank you both for being here and sharing your memories. We could talk about this all
For hours.
It's such a wonderful love story to hear about Janet. I get so many comments from people not only asking about Jim and Janet and their romance, but also how Jim got along with his brother, Peter Arness, because they never really worked together. And for her to share the knowledge of them getting together and all that, to me, this was very special.
I remember the first time you told me that Peter Graves was actually Peter Arness. I couldn't believe it. Mission Impossible?
Airplane?
Yeah, oh, I know. Here, Billy, come sit up here. They really didn't look very much alike.
They both were really tall, and if you look at the photos of them together, you see the similarities, and their dad was very tall, too.
How tall was Peter Graves?
Over
6'3"?
He was like 6'3" or 6'4". You know, Arness was 6'7" almost, towered above everybody.
I'm going to take this opportunity to note that I'm 6 feet and a little change, and my dad claims to be 5'11", but he's shrinking slowly.
It happens with age, young man. You'll find out one of these days.
Oh, boy. How to stay tall for dummies.
Well, I have a copy of the Jim Arness autobiography that he signed to me, which is a treasured item that I have on my shelf.
Very cool. If the book is still available, I will put a link in the description.
Excellent, young man. You're on top of it, and so are all of you out there for listening and enjoying Janet and Bruce Boxleitner talking about the love and the mentorship that Jim Arness gave them.
All right. Happy trails, guys.
Happy trails.
If you enjoy what we do here, please take a moment to follow our show and share these interviews with your friends. You can also find A Word on Westerns on Patreon, Facebook, and YouTube. Thank you, and see you next week on A Word on Westerns. A Word on Westerns is produced and hosted by Rob and RJ Word. Edited by Alex Lockett and Boar and Ebor Dro. Location audio is provided by Richard Reagan. Sound design by Alex Lockett. A Word on Westerns theme song was composed by Karel Pasoda with additional arrangements by Shipwreck Music and RJ Word.